Okay, good evening and welcome to the 417th meeting of the New York Comics and Picture-story Symposium. This is a weekly lecture series on comics, animation, illustration, and other text image work. It's funded in part by the Will and Ann Eisner Family Foundation and the New School. Tonight's event is a celebration of the new book about the cartoonist Jimmy Swinnerton.
Everybody's got one.
There it is. The team behind the new volume, publisher Pete Maresca, co-editor Michael Tisserand, and two of the contributors, Paul C. Tumey and Rick Marschall, will discuss what Swinnerton's life and work means to comics. And here are some brief introductions to the panelists. Peter Maresca is the multiple Eisner and Harvey Award-winning editor and publisher of high-quality reproductions of classic American newspaper strips. He has contributed to more than 100 books and magazines on comic strip history. Maresca changed the concept of comic reprints in 2005 with his original-sized Little Nemo in Slumberland, So Many Splendid Sundays. He has since published over 20 volumes through his Sunday Press, including the upcoming re-edition of the acclaimed Society is Nix. And his co-editor, Michael Tisserand, his Eisner Award-winning Crazy, George Harriman, A Life in Black and White, explored the art and life of the creator of the comic strip Crazy Cat. His other works include The Kingdom of Zydeco, which received the ASCAP Deems Taylor Award for Music Writing, the Hurricane Katrina memoir, Sugarcane Alley, and the photography book, My Father When Young. Current projects include a biography of the New Orleans cartoonist Bunny Matthews and a narrative nonfiction account of Charlie Chaplin and the making of the movie The Great Dictator. Rick Marschall uh, is there, is the author of 75 books, most on popular culture, cartoon history, comics, country music, television history, as well as biographies, Christian apologetics, and politics. A former political cartoonist and comics editor of 3 newspaper syndicates, he has written for Disney and was an editor with Marvel Comics. Numerous honors include most recently the Inkpot Award from Comic-Con International. Among the magazines he founded and edited are Nemo, the Classics Comic Library, and Hogan's Alley. He is currently putting to bed the premiere issue of the revival of Nemo for Fantagraphic Books. Marshall never met Jimmy Swinnerton, but did talk to him on the phone, arranged by Milton Caniff. And finally, Paul C. Toomey is a multiple Eisner-nominated comics historian and author of books including Screwball, The Cartoonists Who Made the Funnies Funny, called a heroic work by Art Spiegelman, and chosen by Panels and Prose as the year's best book on comic strips. He co-edited The Art of Rube Goldberg and Foolish Questions, and is a frequent contributor to books on comics. His latest book, The Art of Milt Gross, Volume 1, will be released in 2025. And now I will pass it on to Peter Maresca, who is the publisher of this new book. So take it away, Peter.
Thanks. People have always asked as I started coming up with new ideas for new books, what's something you really want to do? And Jimmy was there for probably 10 years. And I said, gosh, is there an audience for this stuff? Bouncing back and forth. And we decided to just go ahead and do it. And I was lucky enough to get together with Michael, who had done a lot of, who come across a lot of Swinnerton information while doing research on his Crazy book. So I wanted to bring him in both to give me that part of Swinnerton's life in the desert and to get also have someone to bounce things off of. Is this the way to go? Is this the images to pick for this? So that was fine. And then Rick and I had talked about this years ago and said, well, if it ever gets going, let's get started. And back and forth, and we just sort of got lost in the email. But Rick came on a little bit later because we really, I had the overall view of the strips, and Michael had the desert life, and Paul was putting together a good biography. But no one was really looking at the art of the man and how it fit in the history of comics. So Rick was perfect for that. So we brought him on for this. Um, it was a true labor of love. We'll see if how the comics community responds to it. But I need to thank all the folks at Fantagraphics. My new partner in this, Sunny Press, is now an imprint of Fantagraphics, and they were behind me all the way. They said, "Yeah, let's just go ahead and do it." And they're pretty good about those things. They're not. They like to know the book's going to sell, but up top, is it going to be a good book, and is it going to be important to do? So they were behind us all the way, and we pulled it together in I guess just a little over a year, and I'm really happy with it. So what we're gonna do is I'm going to go through and have a sort of an overview of all the images, and Michael's going to zero in specifically on the story of Sam and how it fits into the American minstrel story, and then Rick's going to give a little bit on the style and the art of Swinnerton and how he really stands out in the comics pantheon. But first, we're going to start with Paul, who's going to give us a little biography. So we have an overview of Swinnerton's life as we get swinging into this. So, Paul?
All right. Just, I always have to ask the traditional question once I get it going. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
All right. Somebody tell me.
Yes.
You can see it?
Yes, looks good.
All right. James Guilford Swinnerton, or Jimmy Swinnerton as he was known throughout his life, was born probably in Eureka, California, November 13th, 1875. He's shown here in 1917, thereabouts. And he passed away just before his 99th birthday uh, on September 5th, 1974. As a young teenager who had gotten an entry into the kitty page of the San Francisco Examiner, the great cartoonist Thomas Aloysius Dorgan, known as Tad, got to meet Swinnerton. He commemorated in this cartoon. Swinnerton sent him out to buy a turkey sandwich. And Tad later would write, "There were three great men in California, and to me, Swinnerton was the whole three of them." I want to give a shout out before I get rolling here to this book and Harold G. Davidson for writing it. It's the only other book I know of about Swinnerton that's out there right now. Came out in 1985. It focuses on his work as a painter. As we'll see, Swinnerton had a sort of a foot in each camp in the popular comics and also as a fine artist. When he was about a year and a half old, Swinnerton's mom died. And his father, being a bit overwhelmed and busy with his own life and career, he sent Swinnerton to live with his paternal grandparents, who were 49ers. They had come over from the state of Illinois in a covered wagon to California, hoping to strike it rich in the gold rush. They didn't. They established a farmstead, though, and young Jimmy was raised by them, and he was especially impressed by his grandfather. And he drew these images much later on. I don't have a date on them, and they come from Harold's book, by the way. And his grandfather was a teller of tall tales. I think that impressed Swinnerton, and he taught the young lad how to hold and fire a shotgun that was bigger than him. But Swinnerton could also hold a pencil, a crayon, or a piece of charcoal, and he began to draw at this time. And I believe he was encouraged by his elders. So much so that and by the way, let me apologize for zipping through this. There's so much more to his story, but I'm giving you the highlights. If you want to have the whole story, you can buy the book. Um, when he was 16 years old, he was hired on to work for the San Francisco Examiner by William Randolph Hearst. And in his essay in the book, Eddie Campbell, who couldn't be with us today, unfortunately, he says that the earliest Swinnerton published art that he could find that actually has his initials or signature on it came in August of 1892. Well, this is from September, so this is a pretty early assignment, and one of Swinnerton's first assignments. And he was sent. I love this story. He was sent with a reporter out to the boonies to track down these train robbers who were running away from the law. They were armed and dangerous. And if you read the headline to the little drawing here, the scene of Evans and Sontag's latest slaughter. Another cool detail about this is the manuscript and the art supposedly were put on a raft and floated downriver to be picked up by an agent of the Examiner and rushed to the paper for press. Those were the days, huh? As you can imagine, being a young man, coming of age among all these characters and all these adventures, Swinnerton became somewhat of a character himself. Here he's being caricatured by a rival paper, the San Francisco Call, by the cartoonist and painter Fred Nankerville. And he was known as a snappy dresser. And indeed, if we look at him on the left here, you can get a glimpse of his outfit. He's hiding behind the Examiner, and he's sitting next to his pal Homer Davenport. They went to art school together, and together they became the two star cartoonists of William Randolph Hearst's first newspaper. And I believe it seems likely other folks on this panel might have a different opinion, but it seems likely to me that the success of Swinnerton and Davenport impressed upon Hearst the importance of comics and having graphics in his paper and illustrative graphics and cartooning. And, he focused on that to such a huge degree that I think it established comics in America and had a huge influence on cartooning across the world. If you see on the right, that's a self-portrait of Swinnerton. He's making fun of himself as a snappy dresser. One more self-portrait from about a year later, and now we have the little bear standing next to him. And that's by this time, what he had become famous for. So let's look at the little bear. This is the very first one. It was a half-column cut right next to the drop cap, sort of an illustration to lead your eye to the beginning of the article. It's usually associated with the weather, although it starts out helping to promote the expo that was happening in San Francisco at that time. More about that in a minute. But it's really neat to have access, digital access from your own living room or bedroom, as it were, to the original source material. So digging around, I found that just about a week earlier, there was another bear cut, another piece of art. And I don't think that's by Swinnerton. It doesn't have his signature. And he did sign most of this stuff. Doesn't look like him. It doesn't have the flair that he had for drawing cute bears. And so I don't know who did that. But in any case, Swinnerton made the bear his own. A couple of weeks later, the San Francisco Examiner published an amazing issue. It's like 70 some odd pages long, which was huge for a newspaper in those days. And it was to celebrate the opening of the California Midwinter International Exposition of 1894, commonly known as the Midwinter Expo. And that issue, and you can find it online, it has over 100 of Swinnerton's bears sprinkled throughout the pages of the issue in all sorts of creative layouts. Like you see here, they're representing the different counties of California. Bears answering the telephone. It's got nothing to do with the article. It's just there. They published some sheet music. There's bears up there. They're all over the paper. The fair even had a Loving Cup prize for the best exhibit that was financed, that was funded by the Examiner, and at the top of it, it had Swinnerton's Little Bear. So this was a big hit for the Examiner. It was sort of the first big popular hit for them, I think. Another self-portrait on the left with the bear. After a while, these little bears got corralled into a kind of a corner of the page in a square, and thus begins kind of the beginning of the newspaper comic strip. And eventually it sort of evolves under Swinnerton's hand into something sort of unique, more like a sort of a panel comic, usually featuring his cute little bears. And he began to introduce cute little Native American children. And he just had, Don Phelps in his great essay on the book, he said Swinnerton, he described Swinnerton's characters as being toy-like. They do have this just wonderful charm to them that I love, and I think it's very disarming when you look at the chaos and that ensues in the comics. It's very funny. 3 years later, the Bears are still going strong. This is a really neat cover to a calendar that was published. But Swinnerton did lots of other stuff during this time, and he matured as an artist. His skills grew, and he just got really good doing lots of different things. He became a very good caricaturist, for example, as you see here. He even caricatured his father in a strip, which we have in the book. And I think it's a pretty good caricature if you compare it to the photo that's there. He drew himself, by the way, in the last panel. This is a fascinating one that I found. He just did a couple of these, but this is pretty neat. It's toys that have been arranged to tell a story, and you do not see the presence of the child that arranged these, the child or children. And in some weird way, this sort of gets at the idea of visual storytelling and pretend, and also looking at the world through the eyes of a kid. There's a lot going on in this simple little strip. I found it fascinating, and it shows the depth of Swinnerton's invention. Even, as he was becoming famous for doing this other stuff, he was still reaching out and trying new things. Well, anyway, enter Thalia Treadwell. One of the heirs of the Treadwell estate, valued at over $1 million at the time, which was a heck of a lot of money back then. I didn't look up what it translates to today, but it would be a lot. In 1897, they were married. They eloped to Salt Lake City, Utah, where they were married. And Swinnerton left this drawing there of him creeping past the tabernacle, trying not to get too many wives. It's a joke on Mormonism, but it's also a bit of a foreshadowing for what was to come in his life, because before he was done, Swinnerton had 4 wives, not all at the same time, but this one didn't last too long. They were married in October. By February, they were divorced. Meanwhile, Hearst has relocated to New York City. He bought the New York Journal, and Swinnerton relocated with him. And he begins to, along with all the other great early cartoonists at King Features, Opper and Dirks and Ottcalt and all those other fellas, he's a regular in the Sunday comics, and he's got a variety of daily comics he's doing. Here, the bears have been switched out for tigers, because New York had the Tammany Tiger, right, by Thomas Nast. So it made sense. So these cute little bears now roam around the pages. By the way, I should say, some folks like to say his bears were the first continuing comic in American newspapers, but I think you get in trouble when you try to name anything first, especially when it comes to something like comics, with so many of them published all over the place. I can think of an example prior to Swinnerton, which was Palmer Cox's Brownies, which I'm pretty sure was an influence on Swinnerton, putting his little cute figures all over the page. Anyway,
yeah, we even have a jam with Swinnerton and Cox drawing
that's
the bears
right.
And his little characters together.
Yes, that's right. There's all kinds of treats like that in this book. The bears evolved. one bear kind of developed a character and became Mr. Jack. And I said, I don't know if he's the first, but he's the first philandering funny animal. Mr. Jack flirts a lot and gets in a lot of trouble. He's usually hit over the head at the end with the rolling pin, or has some sort of comeuppance for his flirting. It's interesting because Swinnerton did a lot of comics with children, and theoretically at least for children, but this has a decidedly adult theme to it. It's sort of the inverse, if you will, of what he was known for, and I think it reflects, the New York influence perhaps a bit too, because Mr. Jack and his cohorts are always super well dressed in these comics, just decked out to the nines. Of course, Swinnerton's big comic that he developed at this time was Little Jimmy, which gives our book the name Jimmy, and which also, of course, refers to Swinnerton. It's kind of neat that he named this comic after himself. This was the very first one that came out in 1904, and Swinnerton said that the thinking behind Jimmy was a little different. It was to try to evolve newspaper comics at the time away from just depicting scenes of slapstick and getting more into character. And so the comic is built around the idea of little Jimmy being easily distracted. So in some ways, little Jimmy might be the first neurodivergent character in American comics. And you see here, he's distracted. He's sent out to go get the milk, and the next thing you know, he's reading a dime novel, or a nickel novel, as it says here, 5 cents, with a friend. Anyway, Little Jimmy went on for decades, as we'll see, and became kind of his mainstay comic.
Paul, I've always wondered
Yes,
about, I think it's the first two Jimmys were published in 1904, but under signature it says '03. So I wonder if they were held up, or the editor spikes them or something. Maybe
good point. I
almost,
wondered that myself. I
yeah.
don't have any idea about that, though.
Yeah.
Um, Being in New York City, being a young man, uh, and not tied down, although he did get married when he was in New York, and that lasted even, I believe, in less time than his first marriage. It was a total disaster. Swinnerton was kind of living large, I think. He was the newspaper guys, they like to burn the candle at both ends. Anyway, he got sick, and you'll see here a couple of excerpts from articles. This one is from San Bernardino County News, saying Swinnerton has arrived in Colton, California in 1906. So the canon story goes that his friend Hearst, Swinnerton was given just a few months, I guess, to live, and his friend Hearst paid for him to go to one of the nation's foremost health resorts. And it's interesting to see on the right this piece from 1906 saying Swinnerton has a stomach, indicating that maybe something was wrong with his stomach. But of course, newspaper reporting back then was fast and loose, so you can't really take this stuff as being completely accurate. But 5 years later, we're now getting the beginning of the myth that Swinnerton had tuberculosis. And I'm not using myth in terms of, the modern usage, like a myth is a lie. I'm sort of saying this is a story that Swinnerton made up to sort of, in an acceptable way, say something truthful about himself. And notice in here that alcohol is also mentioned. So we talked among us, and we weren't sure in my piece whether to say he had TB or what. So we kept it kind of open. We don't really know for sure.
Hey, Paul.
We can talk more about that later. Yes,
Paul,
please, Michael.
I don't think you can overstate how many emails and conversations we had trying to figure out the story behind this. It reminded me when I did the Crazy Cat book of this story that William Hearst gave Harriman a lifetime contract, which is stated many, many times, and I found evidence to the contrary that existed at all. And here was the TB story. I was just hearing today, actually, an interview with the writer John Green, who has a new book out about TB and what an amazing influence that was on our culture. Like Mr. Stetson went out to California to get the fresh air, and invented a new hat. There's all these ways that TB was such a major impact in culture at that time. So it's maybe not surprising that became the thing that it was landed on. But we found no contemporary journalism at that time saying that he had TB. Definitely that he was drinking a lot and he was burning the candles at all ends. And I think the thing against TB we found is that with the newspapers are reporting him being very socially active within weeks of arriving in California. He was doing caricatures at an Elks Club and things like that right away. So if he was really wasting away, he was doing it on his own terms.
I had a photograph in here, but I took it out to save time. He sponsored a band in Colton, a band of about 20 people, and would parade up and down the streets with them. Sometimes they would do morbid, they'd carry a coffin along because a lot of them were there and they weren't sure, I don't know about Swinnerton, but some of the people he was with, they weren't sure if they were going to make it. But he seemed to have plenty of energy. But he recovered his health during this period. And he, more importantly, the real important takeaway here is not, the TB, but that he came back to California and he connected with the land he came from in a really deep and meaningful way, and the native people there, the Native Americans, and it influenced his work for the rest of his life, as we'll see. So he loved it so much, he did not go back to New York City. He moved to Flagstaff, Arizona, where he lived in a hotel and hired a Chinese cook and had his buddies over and lived the high life again, but stayed off the booze. And he even started a comic strip around this time called Mr. Batch. It appeared he was a confirmed bachelor and he did a comic about it, but he met Louise. Louise was, as you can see here, an attractive woman who was also a brilliant writer and talented, just like Swinnerton. And they got along great. And so they were married in 1917. And Louise had a daughter by a previous marriage, which her name was Mary Elizabeth. Swinnerton adopted her. Now, Swinnerton never, as far as we know, didn't have any biological children of his own. So this was his parenting experience, his fathering experience. And he and Louise stayed together until 1935. And from the research I found, the story goes that they both liked to spend, and they had trouble managing money, and it caused a lot of conflict. And eventually they broke up. But during this time, Swinnerton begins to develop into a desert painter. And it was a little unusual for someone to be painting the desert at this time. It was not thought to be a desirable subject for landscape paintings. Interestingly, Swinnerton's comics are full of people and animals. His paintings have no people or animals or any evidence of human work in them, no buildings. They're just the landscape, the plants, the rocks, the mountains, the desert, the terrain, the sky. And of course, during this time, this is in the early 20s, I think, when he brings out George Harriman and other people come to see him too, like Tom McNamara, fellow cartoonist. Harriman, of course, falls in love with the American Southwest, and we begin to see stuff like the Mittens here and Crazy Cat. Swinnerton also incorporated the terrain and also Native American lore into his Little Jimmy comic strip. Here's some from the 30s. These are just fantastic. They're wonderful, I think. We have a few of them in the book. Anyway, almost immediately after his relationship broke up with his third wife, he went to his fourth wife. She was good with money management, and she was a great compliment to him. And they stayed together for the rest of Swinnerton's life. As you can see there on the right, they moved into old age together, and we can be happy for Jimmy that he finally found a harmonious union. And I'm going to just wrap this up real quick. There's more to the story, but he paid the bills with his work for Hearst. He pretty much worked for Hearst through his whole life. Even like his Good Housekeeping paintings, which hopefully somebody else will show in comics, and those were published by Hearst. Hearst owned that magazine. So he had a lifelong relationship with Hearst. He had the money coming in. There were times where he did really well and times where but he didn't have to worry too much about money as long as he was putting out the comics. And what he really seemed to love to do was go out into the desert, sit there and paint a cactus or paint some mountains or a landscape. As he grew older, he began to mentor younger artists, and desert painting became kind of a thing. And they, imagine sitting there next to Jimmy Swinnerton getting some painting tips and lessons. And then you break for lunch and he breaks out the saltines and the canned tomatoes and he regales you with stories, from the old days. It must have been pretty great. So this artist right here, John Hilton, wrote a piece that was published in the 1941 magazine. And I ended my essay with a quote from it. And I'll end my little talk here with that quote. To me, and this is Jimmy Swinnerton talking, to me, landscape painting is a shortcut to faith. The artist cannot hope to recreate nature. The real purpose of a painting is to call attention to the beauty in nature. A successful painting is a signpost reading, "Yonder is beauty. Go see it for yourself." And that's a pronouncement that could also apply to the awe-inspiring compendium that Pete has put together of Swinnerton's comics. One last little thing I wanted to say is today, I don't know if it's well known, but there's a camp made, a state park made out of an area that Swinnerton liked to camp in California. So you can go camp at the Little Jimmy Park, just off Little Jimmy Road by Little Jimmy Spring. Thank you.
Good job.
Okay, I'm going to make sure I can figure out a way to share my screen here.
So Peter, I'm going to drill down on a couple things about the Southwest, also in addition to Sam. Just tell me when you want me to do that. Maybe if you could.
Oh yeah, we'll do that the Southwest thing separate, or we can bring it in the middle, however you want to do it. Why don't we tag that on at the end, because I have the slideshow ready for your Southwest.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Can I ask before we leave, Paul? I don't think you mentioned this. The bear, was that on California's flag at one time? Is that the state animal?
Yes, it still is.
It still is? Okay. So I think, is it fair to say that Hearst was trying to identify, maybe Hearst ordered him to put bears in every cartoon and kind of embrace
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Rick.
State symbol.
Yeah, it was the state expo, right? So they were like, let's get California in here, and that's where the bear comes from. Yeah, thank you, Rick. I didn't make that connection. That's why the bear.
Probably so.
I am going to actually you one time here, Paul. I think the best information is that C.M. Payne is actually the guy that got Harriman out to the desert before Swinnerton did.
Well, you would know.
I have some weird pieces of evidence, including the fact there was a scrappy half of a C.M. Payne comic strip in Harriman's granddaughter's things. But a couple people commented on that. But Swinnerton was certainly the cartoonist with whom Harriman shared the most experiences, the most profound experiences out there.
Yeah, I mean, didn't they go hiking together and stay at the weather?
Yeah, they got lost together supposedly, unless it was like a publicist story. Yeah, they got lost, and yeah, they hiked and they go. I'm going to go into a little bit here later, but they partook quite a bit. In fact, if anyone goes out to Goulding's Lodge near Monument Valley, they have a little hotel museum, and there's a Swinnerton letter to the lodge that's up on the wall there.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Cool. Did you take a photo?
Yeah, it's somewhere. I did.
Nice. It's not easy to compress a huge career like Swinnerton's into a short talk or a short essay.
Yeah.
so much to his life.
All right, so let's get into these comic strips. And let's see, is my screen share showing now?
Yeah.
Yes.
So you can see the first of the comics?
We see the top half of the
Just the
Examiner
top
page.
half.
There you go. Let's make that full size. Okay.
There you go.
I'm going to run through just a sampling. Yes, I'll go through very quickly a sampling of the slides. This is one of the first color Sundays, if not the first, that he did for the Examiner. And this features a really interesting layout. All right. So, Paul, you're the expert. How do I stop this from automatically scrolling?
I'm sorry, Pete. I don't know. You're not on PowerPoint and you're on a Mac. I don't know.
Oh, it's a PDF. It's
you've got to make the image smaller so it fits on your screen, I think.
No, but what's
Not sure
happening
how
is
that works.
it's making a rolling slideshow. I don't even know how to
Yeah.
stop that. All right. Well, I'll just have to
This
play
is
with
what us comics historians spend half our time trying to do is figure out this dang technology.
it.
Hate technology.
All right.
We're all going blind because of it.
By the way, the early Examiner pages were different than the New York Hearst papers. Grant Wallace and
Yeah. Well,
other
this was
artists.
97, and that's just about when he moved to New York.
Yeah.
I'm not sure
It was a different
if
lineup.
this particular page even showed up in New York.
It
Yeah.
did not. Hearst got
Yeah.
smart and economical and just changed
Right.
the masthead after a while on
Right.
the
Right.
two papers.
But yeah, so the interesting thing there is a really unique layout that was done. Is in those days they had whatever they want to do, they were given a full page to just do whatever they liked. One of the interesting, well, the first big successful strips was the Noah's Ark. And they started out with the animals at the Ark. Animals were very big at the time. And the animals on the Ark had sort of they weren't just anthropomorphized, they had their entire society that mirrored the modern Western society. When that got a little tight, they moved to Ararat. And just like in the biblical story, the animals ended up on Mount Ararat. But this time when they arrived, Ararat already had a society to greet them. And they became just sort of mixed up with that society.
Peter?
And Rick has a little more of that
Excuse
in
me,
his
Peter?
presentation that we'll see later. Okay, so we're talking about Mount Ararat, which started out as
Thank you,
Noah's
David.
Ark.
Pete, your restoration work on this is just outstanding.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
great.
that's the only thing apparently I can do with a computer is restore pages.
And who do you work for in real life, Peter? By the way, since you're showing that page, we'll talk about some of the Swinnerton clones, but the character there with the long leg that way,
Mhm.
the Swinnerton look-alike artist, tried to draw like Swinnerton. Gene Carr did a number of comic strip postcards that were accordion postcards of people with long, long, long legs, and he would imitate that page, but in a series of postcards.
All right, so there's the bulldog. We talked about the greatest bulldog. That's one of the first Sunday comics with the bulldog. The bulldog later appeared with the Widow Perkins. The dog's names changed throughout, but it was always the same sort of biting dog. Here's the Mr. Batch that Paul spoke about. This is the first Mr. Batch page, and it seems people are always trying to set him up, and he's always trying to run away from women. Here he is in the movie theater dashing away. This was a wonderful page of a little romance that happened during the middle of an avalanche. By the time they got to the bottom, she accepted his proposal. Another character was Pink Whiskers Jones, and here in this particular adventure, there's the dog again. There's an relatively unknown comic strip that ran for a couple of years. He actually gave up doing Jimmy in order to do Rocky Mason, and Rocky Mason was more realistic. In fact, I think he saw a little bit of John Ford in this style of westerns. The expanses and the doorways, and so.
In the publicity materials, at least, they said that he was drawing upon his early adventures in San Francisco as a news reporter, and having known like Wyatt Earp and some of those folks personally.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Pete, we have a question from Tom Devlin here.
Sure, Tom.
And Tom says, I'm uncertain if you'll cover this, but I think we're moving past Ararat, so I thought I'd ask it now.
Good.
He said the collector told him years ago that there was people knew about Ararat, but no strips survived. But we've got Ararat in the book, so he's wondering if this is a recent discovery. These Ararat extant strips or not. I think either Pete or Rick.
No more than any other. There's many features, and
Right.
all those cartoonists, there's so many features. I think, by the way, that Rocky Mason is an example. And you showed that cover story of a magazine about Swinnerton that ran in the Herald Examiner, a Hearst paper. And Rocky Mason never ran outside of Hearst sections, and not even all the Hearst papers. And it's one of the indignities that Swinnerton suffered or was blessed by Hearst. A lot of his career was almost like, I don't want to say welfare, but if it weren't for Hearst's tutelage or blessing him with jobs and good housekeeping pages, he would have, well, he would not, we wouldn't be talking about him today.
Mm-hmm.
And Hearst would do that. If he had a favorite cartoonist, he'd stick with him, even if no other non-Hearst paper in the country would run him.
Right.
And Swinnerton had Hearst ears to the extent that other cartoonists would ask Swinnerton to go to bat for them.
Yeah.
There was a guy named Pete Peterson that did a comic strip called Pete the Rookie, and it was discontinued during the Depression. And there's a series of messages between Swinnerton and Hearst, with Swinnerton trying to get this guy to keep his job, and Hearst says, we got to cut our corners and let it go. But there's several times that Swinnerton seemed to be he'd lobby Hearst on behalf of other cartoonists.
Yeah, a nice man.
All right. Well, we're going to just use a different application,
that works,
so I don't keep this thing rolling. So anyway, one of my favorite discoveries of Swinnerton was his character Sam. And Michael, you can give us a little bit of history on how Sam came about and where the history of the character comes from.
Well, yeah. So if I'm on a plane with a laptop and I'm doing work, I'm aware if I've got Sam or Musical Moe's or a comic strip like that of my laptop, if somebody's next to me looking to see what I'm working on, because they are the ink version of minstrel shows, the newspaper version of minstrel shows. And Pete and I talked about this a lot. And I think we both sort of agreed that the Turner Classic Movie decision about Gone with the Wind is, we show it because of the greatness of the movie. But we have some context. What's that?
Excuse me, Michael. Can you hit the plus button, Pete, and that'll make it bigger? It's behind that drop-down menu.
Yeah.
There it is. Yeah. If you hit the plus button, it should get bigger.
So
sorry, Michael.
No, I'm just trying to get it to where each one shows up full size. Go ahead.
So we can see it. Yeah, but I know Pete and I talked about this a lot because it's a difficult conversation, and I'm a Sam fan. Pete's a Sam fan. I think we're all Sam fans here. And indeed, if you throw out all minstrel-derived work, you throw out Bert Williams, one of the great stage performers of our country. You throw out most of Mark Twain. You throw out Crazy Cat, which started as a daily strip minstrel show between Ignatz and Crazy, and you throw out Sam. And I don't want to get too heavy and talk about Sam being subversive, except Sam is subversive. Sam is a story about a black guy that encounters upper class folks, usually white folks, and finds something hysterical about them and bursts out laughing, and that laughter is the joy of the strip. Um, so I wrote an essay about Sam. You can read about in the book, and I just want to add one little bit that I didn't put in the book. It was too far of a stretch, but here we are on Zoom, and if we made it through this far, I'm going to read just one short passage from this book, Roy Blount's book of Southern humor. Uh, and this is about Ralph Ellison, who did Invisible Man, one of our great African American writers. And when he moved to New York from the South, Ralph Ellison went with his friend Langston Hughes, the poet, to go to a Broadway play. And it was an adaptation of the Erskine Caldwell novel Tobacco Road, which was a sort of dark humor, Southern Gothic comedy about white sharecroppers that came out 2 years before Little Abner. So here is Ellison's story as Roy Blount describes it. When he saw Ellie Mae and Love uttering sounds of animal passion and floundering and skittering back to back across the stage, Ellison fell into a laughing fit that embarrassed Langston Hughes and disrupted the proceedings. When other patrons in the balcony saw this person reduced to helpless laughter and they saw he was black, they began to howl and cheer, but theatergoers down below couldn't see him and they reacted huffily. As for the actors, they were shading their eyes and peering open-mouthed toward the balcony. Ellison felt, quote, as though I'd been stripped naked, kicked out of a low-flying plane onto an Alabama road and ordered to laugh for my life. Though part of him was mortified, the rest of him doubled over and straightened back and doubled over again and wheezed and choked in laughter. It's a real-life Sam story, right in Ralph Ellison's life. And then Ralph Ellison concludes it by saying that he felt, as he was in the balcony, a wash of embarrassment, self-anger, ethnic scorn, and at last a feeling of comic relief, all because Erskine Caldwell compelled me to laugh at his Southern whites, and thus he shocked me into recognizing certain absurd aspects of our common humanity. So I read that little story to say that was a real life thing that happened in a Broadway, mid-1930s Broadway theater, where Sam, and I think the spirit of Sam that Jimmy Swinnerton recognized decades earlier, brought us all together in a spirit of laughing at ourselves and each other. Sam is, I think, one of our great characters, one of our most difficult characters to maybe to apprehend visually, but well worth reading and to seeing what Swinnerton's up to. Because Swinnerton was a social critic, and he went toward the minstrelsy, which he was a minstrel performer early on, and even in 1910, he and George Harriman participated in a minstrel show together. They worked up and acted in a minstrel show together for a benefit minstrel show in Los Angeles. So that was part of his life, but he used that language in a most remarkable way. And I hope you all enjoy the Sam work that's in the book.
And just to point this one Sam page here, Swinnerton sort of had a repertoire of characters that would show up in each other's strips. Mm-hmm. And so here's a combined strip with Sam and Mr. Batch and even the bulldog that does a good job chewing up on people as usual.
I think something to note with Sam is what the character of Sam is not. Now he has the thick lips and he speaks with an accent, but for the most part, he's a very sympathetic character.
Absolutely.
It's one of the things about the early comic sections. I've complete runs of Puck, Judge, and Life, and they all trafficked Judge mostly in ethnic stereotypes, Irish cartoons, Jewish figures, every ethnic group you could think of. Mostly sympathetic, but they make us wince today. Mm-hmm. When you get to the comic sections, because newspaper publishers in urban centers needed to appeal to the whole population, including immigrants, which is one reason I think the comic sections were popular, because you didn't have to read text too much to understand them. But they couldn't afford to be critical. So we really don't have any comic strips about Jews until they be the agent, et cetera, et cetera. So Sam is sympathetic. the character Mose in Simon Simple is not, but no character was. They were all idiots.
Yeah,
Um,
Sambo is to some extent was a
Sambo by Billy Mariner always comes out on top, always defeats the kids who are playing pranks or ones who try to. So, for the most part, these ethnic groups that were lampooned in cartoons in the magazines are actually sympathetic or heroic figures or always winners in the Sunday pages. So Sam, as an avatar of that, I think is very interesting to study.
mhm.
Yeah, I agree, Rick.
Yeah. Some of the
One
other
other
early comics by Swinnerton, a lot of this was in 1900, and that was the year where a lot of comics were turning to what's the future going to be like. Aviation, airships were very big, so here's a comic about that possibility again, with the bulldog chewing on a guy and affecting the outcome of the story. Paul mentioned the tigers. This was he took his tigers to Europe, and this is another example of a really interesting layout that he used. It just wasn't so typical. Swinnerton did a number of other features for Hearst. This was the cover of a weekly magazine, and a regular feature that showed up was Daydreams of Danny Dawes. Another regular feature that showed up was Children Around the World, and this page is Kids from Tibet. And then we get into Little Jimmy. Little Jimmy was first seen back in 1899, although not with the name Jimmy, but it's obviously the same distracted and mischievous character. One of the early Little Jimmys, I think Paul showed you the first. Jimmy was the original ADD character, and he was in pretty much every story, particularly in the early days. He was sent out on some sort of mission. He would get distracted and then would get in trouble for not completing his mission. This one has a beautiful layout, as you see, spelling out Jimmy has to be quick, 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 but he's slowed down by looking at this adventure with the safe. Nowadays, Jimmy probably would just be diagnosed with ADD and be medicated, and it wouldn't be a very funny strip at all. So we're pretty
Well,
lucky that he stayed the way he was.
except Pete, you can draw a direct line from little Jimmy to Billy's bullshit errands in the family circus, right?
Sure, sure. You guys were talking about the different stereotypes. Rick, here's a brilliant one, and that this brings in two stereotypes.
Oh yeah.
The kids are playing, and the baby gets dirty. Jimmy's little brother, who's supposed to be babysitting with him, so they bring him to the Chinese laundry, and then they get distracted by the big minstrel show, the minstrel parade that's coming down the street. And I guess when the minstrel show would come into town, they would have a parade, just like when the circus comes into town.
Yeah.
And it turns out the baby was crying, but they were able to soothe the baby with some Chinese music. And yes, these were stereotypes because they had the ponytail and
Yeah.
I don't even know if these are real Chinese characters. Probably not.
I think not.
But the minstrel show is ending, and Jimmy and his friends follow the minstrel show, and they'd completely forgotten about the baby. Here's a great story within the story where Jimmy goes to the movie theaters, and there's a newsreel about Jimmy and who's supposed to be taking care of his little brother and doesn't, and that shows up in front of his parents. So it's a really nice story within the story comic. This is one of my favorites and one of the most cinematic, where they're headed off to the park. They get train tickets, and this time Jimmy's dad gets distracted, and mother and children get on the train without any tickets, so they're stuck. You have to get someone to take them home. It rains, it's mud, and this time Dad's in trouble. We talk about the slapstick, Jimmy. There's a really typical scene that was you've found in many comedy films: the swinging doors in a restaurant. This is one of the more riotous Jimmy slapsticks, where the dog chases a character into the orchestra and becomes just inside and out of the instruments and wreaks total havoc with that great lower panel in the center, and Jimmy finding out that that's what the orchestra is all about. Another one of my favorites, where Jimmy's job was to go get the dress vest for his dad, and he gets distracted by little immigrant activity on the street, in this case, most likely Mediterraneans or Italians, and there's no dialogue. They don't attempt to put a dialogue, and Jimmy can't understand them anyway, but he's fascinated by the action and the interaction between all of the characters. Meanwhile, the father has to go out and look at his vest, and Swinnerton points to the real reason he's upset is because he doesn't have his dress vest. He has his silly vest. Again, the arrow's there. And the dad is also hypnotized by these characters going through their various routines about hollering and screaming at each other about Lord knows what. Then, of course, they all make up, have a good time, and go on their way. And Dad's just puzzled. And we're sort of puzzled too, but we're also delighted. Jimmy also made fun of snooty society types. Swinnerton did that regularly, as Rick mentioned. And in this case, it's a woman doing modern dance, and Isabella Duncan sort of character that trips over the croquet hooks in the backyard that Jimmy left there. We're introduced to the character Nina, who's the big sort of sex romance in the comics, and she becomes part of the repertoire of characters in Swinnerton's strips. At some point in the 20s, Jimmy gets involved. I believe it starts in the daily strips and spreads to the Sunday, where he's on a shipwreck. He's part of a shipwrecked group, Gilligan's Island sort of thing. And all the characters end up on this desert island. It's a little unclear exactly where it is, because there are animals from South America and Africa and the South Pacific and Antarctica. But they stay there for several months. And then the story moves to Central America, in South America and Central America. And there's a story of the Incas in Peru. And then they settle in Mexico for quite a while. And Mr. Batch continues to be chased by women. And then finally, the strip settles in the Southwest, where Swinnerton has been living for some time. And Jimmy has more friends to play with. In this case, it's the little Indian kids. And so it's several adventures. And here we learn a lot about Swinnerton. Swinnerton brings in a lot of the Native American culture here. And we see much of that through those strips of that period. Many of these stories involve bad guys in the Southwest. Most of them are taken care of by the Jimmy's Indian friends and also by his animal friends. In this case, they have a big parade celebrating how they took care of the bad guys. And then I'll close with one of the last of the Jimmy strips in this series. It's where a little bit of a Nemo story where Jimmy falls asleep and has a dream about the characters. And there's a talking mammoth that he gets the idea from the petroglyphs on the rocks. And he hears a little bit of a story and falls asleep and gets a little ride. And at the end wakes up and his friend says, "You've been having a fine sleep. You woke up thinking about me for something and thanking me for a ride. What was that all about?" So it's there's all the comics in the Southwest that bring out a real charm and gentle feeling that takes care of Jimmy. In fact, the dog even stops biting anyone who isn't a bad guy. So, and while we're in the desert, maybe we can then bring in Michael, and he can talk a little bit about the stories in the desert. And let me find his slides here. And Michael, you can get started on how.
Yeah, I'll just talk, and you can fumble around with the slides, and it'll be sort of a dramatic element to my talk as I speak. Will a slide emerge that matches the dialogue? But first, I want to answer. Melanie Peterson asked a question going back to Sam. Any connection between Sam and the Laughing Negro, an early recording star who just laughed on records? Chris Ware did a beautiful strip about him maybe 30 years ago. There were a number of laughing records. I don't know that particular one you're talking about, but if you Google Sam and his laugh and Paul C. Tumey, you'll get to a really nice essay that Paul wrote that's online as part of his screwball work that includes actually a sheet music with Sam on the front of it for one of the songs, one of the kind of laugh songs of this time. But that was a big
You know,
that was a big thing, is those laugh records. Paul, you want to add
it,
anything to
it,
that?
yeah, it was Art Spiegelman. I was sharing my love of Sam with him, and he read it, and he's like, "This works like one of those laughing records."
Yeah.
You know, they had 78s of just people laughing, and laughter is infectious. You can go to YouTube and type in laughing records, and you'll find them.
Yeah.
So I took one of those and I married it to a PowerPoint presentation of one of the Jimmies that Pete had. I think the very first one were one of the Sams, sorry,
Mm.
where this guy hires Sam and he introduces him to his wife, and he introduces him as my beautiful wife or something, and she's sort of pretty grim
Right.
looking face, and Sam burst out laughing. But yeah,
Yeah.
you know, so if you go to YouTube and do Jimmy Swinnerton Sam, you'll see that little 2 or 3 minute video I made.
I think bringing back laughing records in 2025 would be a really good idea.
Yeah, we could use it.
But back
Get them
back
on
to
your
the
iTunes.
back to the desert.
So this was before Swinnerton actually moved to the desert, 1913.
Yeah, so in 1911, so most people, it's worth noting that people not on the Zoom, but people out there outside of our Zoom club tonight think of Monument Valley as a John Ford landscape from The Searchers, or Roadrunner and Coyote, or that really great 1964 Chevrolet ad where they drop a Chevrolet on top of a bluff. But the cartoonists got there first. Frank King got there first. George Harriman got there first. And in 1911, Swinnerton wrote one of my favorite things he wrote, this essay, and it was he was like a booster for the Southwest. And I'll just read a couple lines from it. Why do you come out to the far Southwest, to the great American desert and the mountains surrounding it, and by so doing forget for a few minutes the slops and false perfume of the big town? So said a man that seems to have spent more than his share of time with the slops and the false perfume. So as we know, Hearst came out to heal, and we talked about his landscape and his beautiful painting. But thanks to the Coconino Sun, a real newspaper, which was so helpful for Harriman research and even more helpful for Swinnerton research, that's sort of my most enjoyable journalistic discoveries on this project, is tracking Swinnerton's travels and his passions through the Coconino Sun. He was a real town father of Flagstaff, a very prominent citizen. And even if he had, people over for dinner, it showed up on the front page of the paper sometimes. And part of it shows, in addition to his relationship to the landscape, a really profound and fascinating relationship with the Hopi and the Navajo or Dene people that became his close friends, and how he worked through those cultures. One of them was the creation of this character Somali. We're not going to have that on here, but when you buy the book, you'll see this character Somali, which Colton Waugh said is one of the greatest figures of our comic history, and described him so beautifully. With crossed arms, standing very erect, and eyes regarding the ground, he communes with others, makes important decisions, or simply seems to listen to the vast and to him very perceptible voices of nature. A sense of his dignity is conveyed in every gesture or pose, and it seems part of this dignity is that he assumes the same in every other living thing. So he is a beautiful character. I was able to find in the Coconino Sun that Swinnerton had a meal with a chief named Old Chief Somali. So it's Somolale. So Somalali, which strikes me probably the influence for that character. Swinnerton, like Harriman, spent a lot of time with the Wetherill family. There's Clyde Colville, who is the postmaster for Kayenta and close to that family as well. And there's a great picture of Swinnerton with Clyde. I got to put that hat on when I visited Betty Rogers in Page, Arizona. They had her hat in the house. I don't know where it ended up now. Betty's no longer with us, but they brought out Swinnerton's hat when I was interviewing her. I think can you get to that picture of Swinnerton and Betty? Do you have that, Pete?
Yeah, that's coming up next.
Yeah. Okay. So Those are two Navajo girls that were, there they are. That's Betty and Franny, not sisters, but sort of raised as sisters, and in the Kayenta family of the Wetherells. I got to interview Betty, who gave me this quote. You see, my dad, John Wetherell, used to take people on trips to Rainbow Bridge and took them around in Monument Valley, all the scenic spots around the reservation. And he was doing that kind of stuff when we were just little kids. The Harrimans used to come there just like the Swinnertons. They'd visit my folks. They loved the reservation and the Indians. They came every summer. And I asked her, did you see George and Jimmy together? And she said, they were wonderful friends. The jokes they told, you'd just die laughing. They'd sit at that table and start telling something and get us all laughing, make a joke out of something they did during the day, and you would just die of it. But they were such wonderful people.
Weren't those kids models for the Canyon Kitties series? Maybe you could
you certainly imagine so, and other kids. He spent quite a bit of time traveling around. The Coconino Sun has a number of stories. There's a guy, the Commissioner of Indian Affairs, a South Dakota congressman named Charles Burke, who was the namesake of the 1906 Burke Act, one of the pieces of legislation that removed Native Americans from their land. And he really would take aim at cultural practices and saying Indians need to be jailed if they're going against codes that banning Native dances. And he wrote a letter to the Coconino Sun talking about this. And he called for an end to the Hopi snake dance, which the newspaper called the lewd, licentious, and lascivious activities of the snake charmers. Well, Swinnerton, who loved to lead groups of people to the snake dances every single year, went nuts over this. And he wrote letters, and he was interviewed by the paper several times. And I'm just going to end this little section on some of his quotes about the folks that he, really truly came to cross-culturally, I believe, call friends. A few quotes here. I wish we could leave those people alone. Spiritually, we can give them nothing. The prayer of the Navajo at nightfall holds the fundamental belief in the rightness of God's thought in his children's minds. And last year, a writer, Alice Roy, came and interviewed, there's Betty Rogers right there on that screen when I talked with her, came to interview Swinnerton about his paintings, and that letter was still on his mind. And this is the last quote he gave her. I take my wife and her women friends to see these dances. I want Mary Elizabeth, my young daughter, to see and understand them. I can't say the same for some of the dances in the ballrooms of the private homes of our best people. So again, Swinnerton could get on fire on a topic like that. And as a town father of Flagstaff, he would sponsor and work on these big festivals and even work with a Hopi chief and brought in 500 natives to do dances right in Flagstaff. And he fought really hard to make sure they were properly fed and treated and housed during that time too. So thank you, Coconino Sun, for telling that story piece by piece by piece. That Swinnerton's interactions there, like Harriman's, were deep, profound, and lasting, and showed up in his work. You see, both in Harriman's work and in Swinnerton's work, you see a Hopi and Navajo folk life reflected quite intricately in some of the narratives. There's a piece we didn't use in the book, drawn by Swinnerton, of Dirks and Harriman and Swinnerton having a party together. They had all met for George Harriman's birthday in 1922, I believe it was. They had a big birthday party. Dorothea Lange, the photographer, was also there for that party. That's a time I would love to have been a fly on the wall. Time machine set for Kayenta in 1922. So that's just a little more. We go into greater detail in the book, of course, but a little more about Swinnerton and his deep and profound connections to the Southwest and the people who live there.
And there's a final drawing, or our final piece for this section, showing Swinnerton in the desert, but with all his characters from the previous 30 years, 40 years. He
also he watched over Hearst's. Hearst had a property on the Grand Canyon, and Swinnerton would go watch over that. It was sort of the guy taking care of that land and that property in the Grand Canyon. And there's that beautiful image that's in the book. That's top the top panel of one of the little Jimmies, showing the little characters of little Jimmy and his friends just leaning over the ledge of the Grand Canyon, looking out at the vista and just saying "Gee" at the wonder of it. It's one of my favorite panels of Swinnerton's.
That was awesome. Thanks, Michael.
All right.
Yeah.
And yeah, I guess I'd like to say that how thankful I am to this team that's here, and also to Eddie, who couldn't be with us. Just that, because I love doing these books, and I'm basically just a guy who pulls papers out of storage and scans them and tries to put them in a book. But people like Michael and Paul and Rick, who helped me in other books in the past, really make a difference and really bring these books alive and have them proper perspective and all. So I want to thank them.
And thank you, Pete, for giving us a place to publish this stuff. There aren't many people or publishers interested in publishing this type of material. So
absolutely. And the way you do it too. I mean, it's gone into my vocabulary when I talk about reprint books or pitching ideas. Maresca format. That's all I need to say.
All right. Well, I didn't mean for this to turn into a mutual admiration society, but
no, it's just admiring you.
And all right. So let me get back to sharing the screen here, and Rick can go through some of this stuff here. Let's see, share and screens and desktop. All right.
Okay. This isn't going to be too sexy, but the slight connection I had with Swinnerton when he was alive, and I was too. But he might have been on his uppers at the time, but Kniff was a neighbor of Swinnerton. And I guess there's a legend that Jimmy was one of the first 6 white people to settle Palm Springs or something like that. If it's not actually true, he was a pioneer. But anyway, Milt lived out there and called me one day out of the blue, knowing I was a collector, and asked if I could help Jimmy Swinnerton maybe sell his oils or something. And I couldn't. I might have tried harder. It's before that market of plein air desert paintings really took off like it has today. So I couldn't help him, and I was dying to ask him all questions about, did Rudolf Dirks have a German accent? What was opera like, and all those things. And I never did that. I'm waving a white flag, but still it was a thrill to have that connection with the early greats. And I met Dirks once too, fleetingly. To back up, I don't know if it's the next slide or whatever, but okay, international.
Rick,
yeah.
Don't leave us hanging. If you met Dirks, did he have a German accent?
He did not.
Okay.
He did not. He came.
Now, this encounter with Kniff and Swinnerton, I believe the audio is available online.
Oh, gee, that's great.
And I'm pretty sure I have a transcription. If people need,
there's
just
a university archive or something that's got it out there.
Yeah,
it's not on YouTube; it's somewhere else. But there is also an audio interview with Swinnerton that's on YouTube. I think thanks to Michael. You got it up there, right?
Oh, that's right. Yes, we have that second one as well. That was fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. This is a page. Anyway, it's all his characters, which we've already seen most of them. But 1917, one of the Hearst Syndicate's international newspaper service put out a tremendous booklet on all their artists and writers, and the cartoonists all did special art for it. The only regret is they have idiotic poems that are promoting the features and the artists that took up space that we could have had drawings by. I mean, it's really moronic, but that's special. I think it's the next Pete, I see in the background in your bookshelf there you have, well, okay, let's go in order. I have owned two Swinnerton Oils of the Southwest, and my son, who now owns them, has, I think, three of his own. We're always on the lookout. And something to mention is that he was so enamored of desert landscapes and painting them that he kept his studies, half-finished canvases and such, and they're just as charming and dispositive and evocative of the desert as the finishes. He would study a juniper tree or whatever, or Salton Sea, and try to get the sky right and everything. So he left a lot, and they're around, and they can be found.
Any idea how many there are?
I don't know how many, but it was not hard for me to acquire Ted and I to acquire
I'm sure
or
hundreds anyway.
at least hundreds. Yeah. And they show up, and there's a gallery that handles officially or unofficially his work now in Palm Springs, but they pop up charmingly, often inscribed to one of his cartoonist friends or something. But
Well, let's talk about more what makes his comics unique.
yeah. Thank you. I was going to say on the bookshelf behind you is my Abbeville book about America's great comic strip artists. And when I did that, I wanted to tell a history of comics through the work of 16 great artists. And so I could only do 16, and I left out cartoonists I wish I hadn't. One was McManus. I should be shot for not including him. And the other was Swinnerton, and I didn't think much of it at the time. And Swinnerton is someone that tragically historians almost take for granted. Yes, he did Jimmy. Yes, he was there at the start, and yes, it was charming stuff. But we stop in awe at McKay and uh, run out of paper to list operas, achievements, and everything. But it's hard to appreciate Swinnerton like he should be appreciated, and that's why your book, Peter, is so valuable. Um, anyway, the three contributions he made that are really um, powerful to the formation of the codification of the art form. One is parallel action, simultaneous action. And what might have seemed like a cheap fallback in his day, the in the meantime, and in the meantime, he did it in many, many Sunday pages. It wasn't a fallback. It was simultaneous action. In the first years of silent movies, that was an anomaly. Directors actually had a dilemma whether to switch from scenes here and there. Well, readers and viewers understood it, but it was Swinnerton who started that device, really. And
Yeah, and in this one, the cross-cutting isn't just what was happening somewhere else, but what was happening in someone's image. So in the meantime, this was happening, and this is what Mama saw, and then you get the circular.
yeah, it's actually brilliant. It's a tool that cartoonists had at their disposal and didn't until Swinnerton showed them how. So it's a very important contribution. I think it's the next, and it's been mentioned a few times that, okay, it's another meantime one. You go to the next one. Swinnerton had a very conservative style, kind of quiet, not much flair to his line work, but it makes it easy for us to not appreciate how much action and motion and mayhem and anarchy he put into his pages, maybe to compensate for his quiet line work, don't know. But you look through some of the old sections, and I have the Hearst Funnies complete from the start to the 30s, Peter does. If you would take a survey, let's take a sample month or 3 months of strips, there was almost more action and mayhem and violence, funny anarchy in Swinnerton's pages than you're tempted to think, oh, Dirks, okay, there's always an explosion there, or or the other early strips. But man, did he go to town with slapstick and motion. And I believe, as I mentioned before, the cross-pollination of comics in the early movies, that movie directors looked to Swinton as much as any other cartoonist for, hey, we can do this. It's not always cops getting hit in the rear end with a slapstick. It's fights and tumbles and mayhem. And Swinnerton was a master at that. Very often we see us in the penultimate panel here, just a flurry of people fighting and mixing it up. And that is a real hallmark of his work. Motion, action.
Hey,
Unlike,
Rick,
yep.
that's something Opera did too. Do you know if who did it first?
Yeah, well,
I mean, the little spin take things?
Yeah.
yeah, well, they all did it. Opera did it. Dirks did it a lot, and you would see the captain's face here, and the inspector's beard there. But so I haven't tracked the first use of it, but I can say for certain that Swinnerton did it more often than Opera Dirks.
But the Swinnerton really, when he did his slapstick, it really felt more cinematic, like in this
Yes,
page in particular,
yeah,
where the fat woman gets on there and the guy starts to throw his shoe, and then the shoe is thrown, and then there's ducking and biting, and
yeah, exactly. It built. Whereas with Dirks and Opera, there might have been one panel
yeah,
where
yeah.
Maud kicks someone across the farm. Okay, that's one panel. Um, but you're right, Swinnerton
There's a
had to build.
fluidity here that you don't always see in
Yeah,
the other early artists.
it's almost
Yeah,
like a
there's a sort of a rhythm
storyboard.
to the
Yep,
images,
yeah,
you know?
like a storyboard. And then the third thing that he contributed to early comics, kind of a cliche of, in a good sense, with newspaper comics, is his solid blacks. So if you notice the caricatures of his father here, and below that, the woman's dress, cartoonists, for instance, Opera, until his last months, when it would have been easier for him to make solid blacks, always drew the lines between legs and sleeves and always had highlights with shading. And Swinnerton, from his own eye, or maybe the influence of Japanisme, the poster look that was popular then, flat spaces, flat colors, or maybe because he was drawing on cheap newsprint and not being printed and not in slick magazines. But he really introduced amongst his fellows the idea of solid blacks, and wasn't a cheap trick. It was nothing. It draws your eye through the page. It anchors certain compositions, and then he had followers. Dirks did it a year or two after. It's when you look at this early Catsy's pages, and the master of it was George Harriman. Excuse me, George McManus. He did a lot in bringing up fathers through the years, but we can really see that Swin was the first comic strip artist to do that.
And Rick, you mentioned the influencing other artists of the period. So here's an early one by Gene Carr.
Gene Cart not only had at this stage of his career, except for Lady Bountiful herself, but his kids, and after a while they took over the strip. He had several incarnations into the 20s and 30s, but the gang, the little kids who hung around Lady Bountiful and took over the strip, looked like they could have been drawn by Swinnerton.
Yeah, particularly like these guys here, and
Yeah, exactly. And then an artist for the very popular but hard to find today, the preprint section, World Color Printing in the
in St.
McCluskey.
Louis.
Um, Dink Shannon was the name of an artist who could have been Swinnerton's ghost if that had worked out. His kids had the same button eyes. You have a cover, I think, don't you, Peter?
That's right. We're gonna have a plug for
Here we
the
go.
new edition of Society as Nix, and often people have said to me, "Oh, I love the Swinnerton drawing you used on the cover," but in fact, that's not Swinnerton.
No, artist named Dink Shannon, whose every page, many features he did, but he idolized Swinnerton or wanted to pick his pocket or whatever. But he those are Swinnerton's figures that he drew. Dink Shannon. I don't know what his real first name was, but so Swinnerton had a lot of influence within his profession.
I would add Harriman to that too. In 1901, when Harriman first started doing the single panel strips for the Hearst Daily paper, they are absolutely Swinnerton derived. And then one of Harriman's early glorious panels, I think the title was "What Ho the Animals Own Circus," where he shows all the animals are sitting watching as the people are being forced to go through hoops, and the animals are enjoying the people having to perform for them. And if you squint at it, you would guess it's a Swinnerton cartoon.
Yeah, yeah. So he had a lot of fingerprints that he didn't give up. For instance, he was about the only cartoonist who knows why he did it, but it was a trademark of his we haven't mentioned. Not important, but all his dialogue balloons were in quotation
Yeah.
marks.
Yes, I forgot to
Why?
mention.
Yeah, that's right.
Who knows? It was easy to tell who was saying what, but he always did that. One of the many interesting things about him.
We have a question from De Stefano. Did Swinnerton have ghosts and assistants?
Not that I'm aware of.
Not either.
I ran across some stuff that said Duck Winter helped him.
I was just going to mention him. There might have been weeks where Swinnerton was sick or something. So I've never been able to tell if he had a regular ghost or someone who would do the dailies while he did the Sundays or like that. But Doc Winter filled in the Hearst organization until he got his own strips for almost everyone. And you can tell by the way he drew shoes and the stems of the speech balloons when it is Doc Winter, and most of the Winter Swinnerton pages, well, Winterton, I don't know, were the daily strips. The daily strips in the 20s is when he had the most work with Swinnerton. But he worked in New York. And parenthetically, by the way, one of Winter's jobs in the Hearst bullpen was coloring the Sundays, including Polly and her pals.
Oh my goodness.
And we would like to think that's all Harriman, but I mean, Sterrett, but he caught the Sterrett bug and did an amazing job on those Polly Sundays of the 20s.
Now, Paul and I were talking about this one. This is a great original that we got from Carl. And he was wondering about some of the characters here, if this might have been ghosted. But he certainly did a good job of, if it is, and if it was someone else ghosting, he did a great job copying Swinnerton. And this page in particular, even though it is late, 1956, it really has all of the elements that you find in in Little Jimmy strip. The eccentric characters, Jimmy sort of standing by being the normal human being, and the dog and the animal characters. And even in the last panel, there's a little tip of the hat to the Coconino County Board.
Yeah, it's cute.
Yes.
The lettering is often a giveaway, and that's Swinnerton's lettering. So I think it is him. I would bet it's him. By the way,
Paul mentioned the same thing about the lettering.
I wasn't actually, singling out that one, but I was sort of saying it's weird that his later style, the figures become elongated after decades of drawing these diminutive figures and playing off the humor of that. And I don't know, Rick, maybe you can, or other folks can speak to that. Until I started looking more at Swinnerton, I just figured that was done by assistants, but maybe not. Maybe his style evolved.
I think it did evolve. I can't see many other touches of people's hands.
Okay.
He might have gotten a memo saying your panels are too empty, and instead of adding more figures or background maces, he just made them taller.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Cartoonists will do that. You often see it late in the cartoonist's career, they'll do a lot of close-ups, and it's just so they don't have to draw lamps or mountains, ranges, or whatever.
We have a question from Stephen Smith. Did Swinnerton have any artistic influences on his landscapes? So right when he showed up, there was a German painter named Karl Eitel, Eytel, and they would go paint together. And he was a pretty prominent guy. There's a book called The Wonders of the Colorado Desert that Eitel's drawings appeared in. And apparently, and I think this is all from Harold Davidson, I believe, from the book that Paul held up, that Swinnerton had money that Carl did not have because of his cartooning. So Carl would show Swinnerton where to go, and Swinnerton would help provide the paints and the equipment and things like that.
Yeah,
In
I'm
fact,
not aware.
there's a sweet quote is that from Davidson, that Jimmy would often give him tubes of paint that he pretended not to like. Another sweet side of Jimmy, it sounds like.
Interesting about tubes of paint is that Swinnerton plainly fits in the plein air tradition. And that really started around 1800 in France. And it was a reaction to painters should sense nature. So that's when portable easels were developed and artists went out of the studio. And there's a direct line to the Barbizon School and the Hudson Valley School, more realistic. And then, okay, plein air. But Swinnerton would do that. He would set up his portable easels. We had a photograph before, but he liked being in nature to paint nature. Didn't work from photographs.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was also, by the way, the invention of ready-made tubes of color paint, not only portable easels, that encouraged that whole movement. That's parenthetical about plein air.
We have a question. Any Jimmy merch? Was there licensing on Jimmy during that time? You don't see a lot of it, right?
No. There was not a big little book, but I don't know what it was, also Whitman, but an oblong shaped book.
Yeah, there's this part of that series.
There was a series of postcards which are included as a bonus in the book, facsimile postcards.
A great thing about all your books, Pete, is those extra features that you throw in. It's terrific.
Yeah, it's fun to find a little something to really add to it.
As far as licensing, we can say that there was one animated cartoon of the Canyon Kitties.
That's right.
That Warner Brothers, I think, did. I think it was Warner Brothers.
Yeah, and they sent the animators to the Grand Canyon, and Jimmy went with them to explore the area. So,
yeah, the backgrounds in that cartoon are amazing. The background paintings.
Yeah.
I have a question. Do you think one of the reasons why it's taken so long for Jimmy Swinnerton to get his due is that he did not have, even though we all love little Jimmy, for some reason he didn't become a superstar lead character. That for some reason Swinnerton's did not create that one character, the Hans and Fritz, the happy hooligan, whoever, that didn't quite lock in the way others did. Is that right, or is that not right?
No, it is right. It's what I was hinting at before, that except for Hearst, William Randolph Hearst being his mentor, or like in medieval days, it would be, sponsorships of artists. Swinnerton hardly ever broke out of the Hearst sections. Dirks, of course, did. Opera was merchandised widely and appeared in non-Hearst papers. Buster Brown was across the whole landscape. And if you didn't subscribe to Hearst newspapers from the turn of the century into the 50s, you wouldn't have known there was a Jimmy Swinnerton. We appreciate him, but the public really didn't at the time. Do we know why?
Oh, it's also noted that little Jimmy, that's right, did appear in a Betty Boop cartoon.
Oh,
that's right.
Yep.
So
thank you.
Fleischer too. So was the other cartoon, was it Schlesinger, or was that a Fleischer cartoon?
The Canyon Kitties?
The Canyon Kitties, yeah. So it was Merry Melodies.
Oh, no, that was MGM, I think.
Okay. It's a good cartoon.
Quote me on that. Yeah, you can probably find it on YouTube. So
But toys and games, no, I'm not aware of any actually.
Hmm.
now someone was made a comment earlier on about Rick, when you were talking about the mayhem and anarchy present in Jimmy's comics,
Yeah.
wondering if that was an influence on the Marx Brothers. You want to speak to that?
I would guess no. I don't see any evidence of it. I mean, we
I
know
think there
people.
was a connection. They had a common ancestor, which was vaudeville comedy.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That I think I sort of the reason that I asked you, Rick, is because you put out a special issue of Nemo, which was so great, all about screwball comics, and you
Yeah.
sort of created a name for a subgenre of comics. And of course, I picked up on that. But
Yeah. Very
I think
well.
that sensibility of drawing comedy out of things going wildly chaotic and crazy
Yeah.
is present among both in films and in comics of that era.
And the licensing and merchandising was so important in establishing the comics early on. So we
Yeah.
had, scads of Mutt and Jeff statuettes and merchandising that, of course, all the Couples Leon books. And I don't know if you can see on the shelf behind me, I've got about a dozen ceramic Majolica figures of the Oppers characters. And it just didn't happen with Swinton. He had enough characters it could have, but we just don't see it. It's an anomaly. And thanks to the godfather and saint of the comic supplement, William Randolph Hearst.
Mm-hmm.
Where would Harriman have gone if it weren't for Hearst's?
I wouldn't have seen that much.
Yeah.
Well, I thought I'd just throw up this other images in the book. You can see this one where one of the errands Jimmy has to do is go get the paper and gets distracted by the Sunday comics. I want to see Hooligan.
Wonderful.
Look at Maud. I want to see Hooligan. Look at Fritz and the Captain. Golly, it's great. I'm going to tell Mommy you won't let me see Hooligan. Look at Leander fall off a tree.
Yeah. And the guy laughing in the penultimate panel is just classic. I mean, when he didn't have characters fighting with each other, he'd just get motion and animation into figures like that. By the way, I have a Sunday original of Jimmy from the 50s that was very much like this setup, except in the last panel, instead of him being spanked or whatever, Jimmy just stayed out in the lawn, laying down his face in his hands, just reading the funnies. It's a great single panel.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a long career, he could be forgiven for recycling a gag.
Especially such a good self-referential piece.
Absolutely. It's not. It's
Once
not
again,
just.
I have to thank everybody here and also a lot of other people who helped out in the book, including Carl Lenich and all the folks at Billy Ireland, and really helping me out with getting the material we didn't have and getting a lot of the insight that I personally didn't have. So this was great.
Yeah.
Well, again, Pete, you did a fantastic job restoring this art. It's one of the hallmarks of these books. So thank you. Thank you for that.
Yeah, great job.
Thanks.
Great job.
We have a question. We have a question. So, do I buy these books instead of looking for a new place to live? And I think we can agree on yes. Yeah, I think the answer
Well,
is
the
yes.
thing to do is you really write lots of letters to your local libraries and universities. Say that we need this book. A dear old friend of mine once said, I have a collection of thousands and thousands of books. I keep them at the libraries.
Yeah.
Nice. If you have enough Sunday press books, you can kind of build a shelter with them. So
Yeah.
Yeah, you can live inside. There you go.
And except that Kramer in the Seinfeld episode took his thunder, I'd be making a joke about just put legs on the books, Peter. Yeah. By the way, one thing I jotted down that's not really pertinent here, and you started thanking everyone. at the end of their lives, George Harriman, widowed, was romancing Jimmy Swinnerton's third wife. And a lot of the letters and drawings and the sketches that I have came through Louise, who, God bless her. No, Louise, yeah, not Gretchen,
Yeah,
Louise.
Louise
Merriman.
Scher Swinnerton.
Yeah, who kept all that stuff. Studio photographs on the backs of which he wrote sarcastic things about himself, and people were laughing behind the photographer's back and all that kind of stuff. But that
Well, Rick,
was,
I think that's how you can sell your comics documentary to Netflix, the sex lives of the great comic artists.
I'll try anything. Yeah. Or X Lives. How about that?
Yeah, yeah.
X's and sexes. But yeah, I want to join too. And Peter, you do a tremendous job with these books and the dimensions of them. Listen, all those full pages I've spoke through the years. Roy Crane gave up his Sunday page
Mm.
in the 30s when NEA said, you've got to make a grid, you got to work by this template and have
So we can
certain.
put in thirds and halves and yeah.
Exactly. And he said, literally, he said, all the fun went out of it.
Mm.
And showing cartoonists these old pages where they could fill a full page in any format or mixture. That's what was fun about the early comics, and we miss that. So thank you
Yes,
for
indeed.
making it fun again for us.
Any other questions out there in question land?
Can I say something?
I guess so. Go right ahead.
I did a project my last semester. I'm a student at IU. I did a project where I had to hand code a collection builder exhibit. And my exhibit was on comics in the World's Fair. And Alan Holtz is who directed me to Swinnerton's original Bears thing. And I really wish that I had this book came out about 2 months earlier when my project was due.
Time for a new project.
Yeah.
Right. Well,
There's always
next
another
time contact me, and you may be your next project. You may be in the middle of a book that we're in the middle of. So who knows?
Yeah. But I'm actually going to update it because it's a live website. I'm not going to update it so I can have the notes there.
There you go.
That
Peter,
sounds great.
you're being badgered to make your next book an opera book, Pete.
Well, originally I had planned to do a book on the Hearst stables, an anthology that would have Opper, Dirks, Outcult, and
Swinnerton.
Swinnerton.
Garrett?
What's his
And
name?
there was this guy, whatever his name was, and there was just so much good Swinnerton book. I says, well, it's Swinnerton material. I said, well, this is a book. Now there's lots of good Opper and Dirks and Outcult in Society as Nicks, and fortunately, you don't have to spend $800 for it anymore because there'll be a new version coming up, which has a
by
lot
the
of
way,
material in it.
Opera
And
still is my favorite cartoonist from through the years, and Opera will be the cover story. And since I can't sell a book, a full biography, but
right,
major article monograph on Opera, the first issue of the revival of Nemo magazine.
right. Well, if Jimmy does okay, we can both bring the Opera idea to Fantagraphics and see what happens.
Grand Opera.
Peter, could you
Yes.
say something about the kind of restoration that's involved?
Yeah, I had 20 years ago when I first, in fact, it was 2004 at the Comic Con, and I saw Rick Marschall the first time I saw him at a Comic Con. Didn't see him again for another 20 years, but I said to him, the Nemo anniversary is coming up next year, and it'd be great if somebody did something. Do you know if anything's going on? And Rick said, no. He said, the Fantagraphic books are over with. I don't know anything. So I decided, okay, well, I really need to do something to show that, to show people what Little Nemo really looked like. And because there were only these smaller reprints. So I had a little Photoshop experience and I started doing experiments with restoring the old newspaper pages. And what I didn't want bright colors and white backgrounds, which is all of the newsprint or the newspaper comic reprints at the time. They just sort of modernized them to make them look like new comics.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to just present them as they were, old and yellow with tears in them, which was another thing that had been done. I know a few people had done some experiments and just saying, this is the way it is. This is the way a collector sees them. So something in between the two. So I tried to get make them just not perfect, but better than you'd see a ratty old paper, but not like brand new. And it was good that I had not done anything in print before, because I didn't know what should be done and what shouldn't be done. Mm-hmm. So I just experimented with a lot of different ways to adjust the colors and adjust the contrasts to make it look like something. I say, okay, well, this looks like I'm looking at my own collection, except it's cleaner. Mm-hmm. And the big trick, which now I think other people have started doing, Tasha and others with their books, is I created a newsprint background that was just blank newsprint. Yeah. Because all of the comics, every time you'd adjust them so that the color would be just right, just the way you want it, you would always have a different shade of background. So it was sort of messy as you went through the book. And so I took actually I did like 6 different scans, so every page wouldn't be identical. That was a little crazy. And then lifted all of the panels of the comics off and created a new Photoshop layer with just the comics, and then dropped that into a constant background of the same sort of newsprint. So that gives it some coherence, and at the same time, you get different shades of colors that happen in different newspapers.
And it worked, yeah.
Yeah, I was lucky it worked.
Yeah.
And thanks to friends in Paris, Rashid Baruka and Philippe Guillemette, we just spent a couple of weeks and put a book together and did something that hadn't been done before, because I didn't realize it couldn't be done. So that's why we went ahead and did it.
When I did my Little Nemo reprint books, the things I did not want to have them look like was in so many of these books, for instance, Woody Gelman's books, where they would mask out the balloons so they'd be white. But then what was white in the original pages, a guy's shirt, for instance, would still be yellowish.
Right, right.
Yeah, there you are.
Yeah. Yeah, so you did, and that's another thing too that I didn't want to do, and you didn't do either, because it's a little tough to see, but the balloons still have a slight yellowish tint. They're an off-white to them, and they're not as white as the background. So.
Yeah. Sometimes I ask the printer in Hong Kong to, what you did, add that faint yellow tone, or he shot the newsprint plane.
Of course, it was a lot easier when I went to do it, and it was really a matter of timing, because just as I wanted to do that Nemo book, printers were shifting from color separation to going from a PDF right to a printing plate.
Yeah.
And that made it possible for someone like me that had no experience in color separation or putting a book together in that way, could just use Photoshop and create a PDF, put them together and send them to the printer.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's why we were able to keep those. I didn't have to try and make sure that they didn't do white, that they did off yellow. Like for you, it was a job at the printer you had to do. For me, it was built into the PDF. That's just the way it was.
I just wanted to
correct of stories of that you hear. I don't know how apocryphal it was, but Winsor McKay and others going down into the basement with the printers and having them tweak the colors right there.
Wow. There was like a level of craftsmanship in printing these pages that's remarkable. You know, we look at these like great old buildings that our forebearers built, you know, and you go, how in the world did they ever do that? Well, I look at these pages, these Sunday Comics pages, you know, in the original tear sheets, and it's just astonishing. The gradations of color and the subtleties and the nuances. They were, I think some of them maybe came from Europe and like Italy, you know, where they were master printers. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I just wanted to correct one thing. I said earlier that the Canyon Kitties cartoon was MGM. I just looked it up. I was wrong. You were right, Rick. It was Warner Brothers. It was Leon Schlesinger. 1939. It's called The Mighty Hunters.
And David Lasky posted a link to the actual cartoon in the chat.
Oh, good.
Oh, swell.
Right. And it looks like it was actually intended to be a series, but it didn't do that well. The humor is too gentle. according to
that is an aspect of Swinnerton that I've written about, the gentleness of his
You
humor.
choose a vehicle that gives you more than expected. Some might call you.
I've learned to throw my voice.
Anyway, thank you.
There's a gentle quality to his humor that I find differentiates him from the rest of the King staff and other cartoonists of the time. And there's a kind of a sophistication because of that in reading these.
Yeah.
I think so too. And there's some correspondence between Gretchen, his wife, and Hearst, where they're trying to get him to add more. They feel like he's not doing enough in the Canyon Kitties, and I think that was by design. I think in that case it wasn't Swinnerton trying to get away with doing less work. I think he did, and some of those pieces later on really did have a less is more.
That's right.
Influence of the open spaces.
Right. He worked with negative space. That could be another, one of your innovations, Rick. Perhaps there's a remarkable use of negative space in his comics, a sensitivity to it that you don't see among his peers.
Good point. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm hoping that there's enough of an interest in Swinnerton. I'd like to actually do a smaller book and just reprint all of the Canyon Kitties and the other themes that he had for Good Housekeeping.
I want to bring out a little. I'd like to bring out a little paperback of the Mr. Jack comics. Oh wow! Look, Mike, you have that. Wow.
And this is the one we didn't talk about. Hostine Crotchety, or How a Good Heart Was Born, which was a Swinnerton children's book.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, he drew a little picture of himself.
Oh man!
To be able to find
you
online.
Went for it.
I went for it. Yeah.
Nice.
So
I have a signed copy too. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really lovely later work by him.
Yeah. And I wonder how many sold. Not easy to find, and the few that I have seen are autographed. So maybe just
yeah.
With some cartoonists, it's harder to find an unsigned copy than it is to find a signed copy.
Yeah, so there's some bits of that.
Yeah.
And a few of the other things that were done for Good Housekeeping.
And another thing that he did for the Good Housekeeping was he wrote that stuff. He wrote the poems, the verse, and the narrative. I read an interview with him somewhere where he was very humble about it. He's like, I'm not very good at it, and I spend a lot of time at it, but I still give it my best.
Yeah.
In the Wetherells guest book for George Harriman's birthday, Swinnerton wrote in Spanish. I drew a little cartoon, and it translates to "Sling the bullshit and get paid for it."
Now, we talked a little bit about how Swinnerton would expose his audience to a lot of the culture and religion of the tribes in the Southwest. And there was a series that went on for a couple of weeks of dailies. And the book includes a couple of daily strips as well. And this series in particular.
Yeah, it's really wonderful.
It's really just quite charming, and not the sort of thing you would see in a Sunday comic strip in the 1930s.
Yeah.
Or daily comic strip.
Daily comic.
Those are from a small stack I purchased from, I'm drawing a blank, Hetchel, the Hetchels. There used to be a seller. They're still on eBay.
Dick and Elaine.
Okay. Elaine, right. She had a warehouse in Portland, I think. And I really wanted to get there before they packed it up, and she went to live with her son in Arizona, I think. But they're still selling on eBay. But I was astonished when I got this little stack, because I was expecting a gag a day comic. I didn't expect the continuity, and I certainly didn't expect anything this beautiful. It's astonishing. So I'm glad you put these in, Pete.
So there's some of the old stuff that was done before the comics in San Francisco.
What was the Wasp?
It was an imitation of Puck magazine, but entirely West Coast, entirely San Francisco oriented.
Yeah.
Why was it called Wasp?
Because it had satirical jabs at people.
I thought because they were all white Anglo-Saxon Protestants.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, this is from Eddie's section, and too bad he couldn't be with us to give a little more detail on this, but this was all the San Francisco stuff.
The Examiner is full. Almost every day there's Swinnerton work in those pages.
Yeah.
He was contributing so much.
By the way, the Wasp, their chief cartoonist and art editor was Charles Salberg.
Oh, from Chicago.
And then he worked for the Interocean in Chicago and did the Tingling Kids, which
right.
preceded the Yellow Kid.
And then he went on to the World.
Went on to the World as cartoonist and foreman of the color print shop.
Oh.
Important name, forgotten, but important name in comics.
Yeah.
I've always been impressed when I see a Wasp cartoon. They're really nice looking.
It was a good magazine, yeah.
Nicely printed. Is that a Reuben behind you, Rick, that I see?
You know what it is? It's the came from the Bill Crawford estate. It is the maquette for the Reuben Award. Rube Goldberg designed it. Yeah, Rube Goldberg designed it. Bill Crawford did it in clay, or I don't know what material, but that. And then it was the bronze. Well, it was fashioned from bronze from that maquette. So yes, that is a Reuben.
Very cool.
Award.
Very cool.
Yeah, and this was another feature that was done for the Hearst Sunday magazine, and he did a whole series on Seeing America Last, where he would show his love of the American West, and at the same time have a social satire on the people who came to visit it. Yeah. So in each one, there's some really dynamic vista, and in this case, it's the prehistoric ruins. And the tourists are there just sort of gossiping about their everyday life without even paying any attention to the glory that's behind them.
Tell you what, to my taste, my two favorite series he did was this series, and also for the Sunday magazine sections of Hearst, the Danny Dawes.
Right.
Dreams or Daydreams, which was it?
Right. There's Daydreams of Danny Dawes.
Yeah, wonderful.
And there were a series of 8 or 10 of them, and it was. It was a little bit like other strips that have been done before. It was Danny Dreamer, but it didn't attempt to have a story. It was just a wonderful concept, a dream of a life that he didn't have, and was always interrupted and wanted to be able to just stay in his dream world.
Yeah, it was terrific.
It's just gorgeous, and great use of black right there.
Yeah.
Can I show something, or you got something else to show there?
No. Pete? Go for it. What do we got?
I was going to put this in my talk, but I edited it out. This is really interesting. It's a page from. Let me make it bigger. The San Francisco Examiner, 1893. So this is in Swinnerton's first year, and look what he's depicting right here. You can see his signature right here. He's depicting the cliff dwellers.
Wow.
It says from a photograph, and there's 3 of them in here. There's one right there. So I think that's kind of an interesting coincidence. But this gives you an idea of the other type of art that he was contributing to the paper, Swinnerton.
That's great.
I guess I don't know that he did this one, but I think he did.
There's a question
So
asked.
the die was cast early.
Yeah, that's great.
There's a question asked. I think the answer is no. Did Swinnerton ever win a Reuben?
No.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
I don't think he traveled much to New York at the time.
I read in an interview once he was out west, he would go twice a year, and he would sit with Hearst or Rudy Block or whoever was in charge and figure out 6 months of comics in general, and then he'd go back home. So I don't really know, if he did that every year, but in the year he was interviewed, he said that's what he was doing. So he made 2 trips to New York a year at least for a while.
And he didn't do the kind of New York
Maybe he was
partying
scared he
that
was
he
going
did
to
in the early days.
get sick again. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I think he never went to Ogunquit that I'm aware of, and I bled John Dirks dry about that artist and cartoonist community up in Maine. Dirks and others would visit him, but I'm not aware that he ever went to Ogunquit. Or I have a lot of archives from the Larks and the Banshees and the big banquets and with a lot of entertainment that Hearst threw during American Newspaper Publishers Association Week. And now that I'm thinking of it, I don't know any photograph or documentation that Swinnerton was at one of those. They would hold all the Hearst stars out to them, but never did I see Swinnerton. So that's a good point. I love the West. Huh?
Let's see.
Michael Dooley posted an interesting essay about the Wasp for people who want to go further into the Wasp in the chat.
Great.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of Swinnerton oils, his finished pieces and his field studies, and a lot of his pen and ink work. But to me, his best medium was watercolor, and I've never seen a Swinnerton watercolor landscape. You would think with the ease of watercolors over oils, he might have done studies in his travels. Are any of you familiar with watercolor landscapes by Swinnerton?
Well, the one you gave us for the book is almost a landscape.
Yeah, and that's a drawing done in a copy of a book.
Mm-hmm.
No, I've never seen that.
I never have either.
Yeah, no.
By the way, you're reminding me, I should have offered this to you at the time. I haven't thought of it, haven't read it since, but the complete run of International Studio magazine, monthly art magazine. It was first rate, originally British. And after Hearst bought it, I think everything he owned had to have international in the title. But they did a long, long feature on Swinnerton and mostly his fine art, but also his comics. I haven't thought of it for years. Did you have access to that, Peter or Michael?
Haven't seen it.
No.
It's a long article. I'll try to dig it out. Wow.
Yeah, there's that watercolor from Rob. And you said that was done in a book?
That's done in a copy of Hosteen Crotchety.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
He didn't do that in my copy, but
he was a fantastic watercolorist.
Huh?
Yeah.
You might reach out to that gallery in Palm Springs, Rob.
Yeah, good point.
Hmm.
Yeah, I've never seen one.
No, I haven't either.
Well,
Any other questions?
I'm gonna put in the chat. I'm just, can't stop the Google. There's a 1903 watercolor. It's not one of his westerns, but he did a 1903 watercolor called Windy Trail that is on californiawatercolor.com.
great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Look for that. There's the link. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the dry air. Michael Avolio says, I wonder how common desert watercolor plein air paintings are in general, since the heat and dryness would dry watercolor faster.
Good point.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, good point. It gets hot and dry out there. Yeah. Hmm.
Oh, I guess you note a note from Stephen about the next book. Um, well, the next one is the new edition of Society is Nix, and I added 25 comics and 8 or 10 pages that we've come across since the last edition. And assuming people take to this idea of these anthologies, I'm going to make it a trilogy with the Society is Nix and Forgotten Fantasy, and then we're going to do another one that's called Domestic Blitz, and it's all about the family comics. Because after the social commentary comics that came out of the editorial cartoons of the 1900s, and the fantasy comic strips that came out of children's illustrated book artists, the people moved to the suburbs, or maybe it was Brooklyn was the suburbs, but the middle class began to grow
Yeah.
in the teens and 20s, and the comics changed to fit that new audience.
Yeah.
So there were many more comics about individual families and developing the whole concept of situation comedies that then spread to silent movies and radio shows. So things like Bringing Up Father and Polly and Her Pals and Moon Mullins, which I think is really underrated and
Yeah,
needs more,
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. So to get some nice large full color reproductions of these early family comics be great fun. Even the Bungle Family, and Robert Crumb will be very happy that we're doing the Bungle Family. It's his favorite strip for some reason. It took me a while to actually get into it until I started reading it. It is very wordy, but it's just hilarious and tremendous social satire and really well written and a great, really great situation comedy. So all of that stuff from 1915 to around 1929 or 1930, we're going to cover those family comic strips.
You're going to do working women strips in there too?
Oh yeah, Winnie Winkle, of course, and Tilly the Toiler, and
great, good idea, love it. Yeah, Crumb, the year that they did a big exhibition of Crumb at Angoulême, he turned to me at one of the meals and he said, "Forget Nemo, forget Terry and the Pirates. Everyone's doing them. Do the Bungle Family." And I said, "I'm going broke with popular strips. You want me?"
Well, that's what he said to me. He said, "How do you make money on these things?" I said, "Well, sometimes I do, like Little Nemo. Other times, not so much." He says, "Well, yeah. Well, if you don't want to make money, do a Bungle Family book."
Same thing. That's right. It is a great strip, though.
Yeah.
Well, for those that don't know, Bill Blackbeard put out a volume in his Hyperion Press series, right?
Yeah.
Family Dailies.
Yeah. But it was the first year.
Oh, first year.
Yeah.
More recently,
it really grew into its own in the later 20s.
Yeah, right.
Yes. Yeah. I think it started out under the title Home Sweet Home, was it?
Yeah, that's right.
Something like that. But then more recently, the Library of American, there it is. Yeah, thank you, Rob. The Library of American Comics put out a year in their oblong-shaped series. And I actually got to write the introduction for that and discovered a lot of interesting things. For example, Tuthill they wanted to make a radio program out of the Bungle Family. They gave it a different name. It was called the Puddle Family because it was sponsored by a soap detergent company, Procter and Gamble, and it became basically the first soap opera because of that.
Wow.
Another interesting. Well, anyway, I won't go on, but the Bungles, I love them too. And Dean Mullaney, who was the publisher, and book designer of the Library of American Comics. He's sort of semi-retired. He just sent me a huge box of his comics, and there are about 10 years of Bungle's dailies in there. Maybe we'll get some more out.
Yeah.
We'll sell
I was
dozens.
just thinking, as Rob held up the book with this group here, they could probably get any comic reprint book that's ever been done without leaving their chair, and just reach around to their shelves and find it's all there.
By the way, the closest radio did a long-running show that was, to me, always seemed like the Bungle Family of the Air, and that was Vic and Sade. Very much like Tuttle's work, the sensibilities and the seeming boredom of it, and just drop dead funny.
Yeah, it's really funny stuff.
Yeah, great stuff.
Yeah, and I just Rob talking about how after 30 minutes you get a headache reading it. So it's one more reason why it would need to be in a larger book, because the type is so small.
Well,
there's so much of it,
man, especially in the dailies. I think Bill Blackberry called them, I forget what he said. They were like storm cloud balloons. They're just so full of text. But it actually rewards reading. It's not like a modern comic strip that can be read in about 10 seconds. It takes 4 or 5 minutes to read one of those dailies, but it's satisfying once you do. And then when you read them in a series and you watch the inevitable, the characters just inevitably trip over their own foibles and flaws, it just gets funnier and funnier and funnier. It's like Dickens or Thackeray or something. It's great stuff.
Exactly. And very much like Al Cap, in that you can't think of many comics where there was one quiet center amongst the crazy ones, or a character without any redeeming values. I mean, there's always a Pogo who's a solid citizen amongst. But in the Bungle family, they were all idiots.
That's right. Everybody.
Posers, pretending people, just shallow hypocrites. It was great.
Grouchy, grumpy. Yeah.
Look at this text.
There you go. Yep. Great stuff.
So yeah, there is lots more to be seen that hasn't been reprinted, and hopefully I'll have the opportunity to get more of this stuff out to the public in a way that it does it justice to the way the original comics appeared.
Yeah, well, that's what you're doing.
And congrats on bringing back Nemo. I hope is that going to be a semi-annual thing, or whenever we can get it out thing, or?
Well, yeah, that's the way it'll work out. I mean, it's almost been out for 5 years now, but Gary, it'll be Fantagraphics again, and it'll be 10 by 13, full color.
That'll be nice. Yeah.
Almost 200 pages. So Gary has great dreams for it, including the dream that I'll actually get off my ass and do it. But he's talking about doing it as an annual, which is probably going to
makes the most sense.
My schedule best. And at that, still called a magazine, but that's his game. I'm just filling the pipeline.
Well, you got a lot of people in this gang you can enlist for assistance and imagery.
Consider it official, everybody. An official invitation, yeah. Then also I should mention, I don't know if you all get yesterday's papers, but I inherited that from John Adcock. And we've had about 7 million, not since I took it over, but 7 million page views. So someone looks in on it, but I do a couple things a week for it, and I wish you'd all contribute if you wanted to think of it. Who knows it? Have you read it through the?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think we all have interesting scans or things to be scanned that can be tossed out. So just keep that on our lists.
Thank you, everyone. That was
All
great.
right, this has been fun.
Thank you, Ben.
We went a little long. Thanks for sticking with us, Ben. But
No, there's no cutoff.
Just a drifting off. It's like a peanut spelling bee. You just see the faces sort of disappear.
And
okay,
people out there right now, when we talk, they're hearing wah 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 wah.
So now we all go
one more time for everybody that helped Jimmy be a really terrific book, and all the help we're going to get from everybody in the future, I'm sure. Let's thanks in advance.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's a wonderful book.
All right.
Thank you,
Well,
Peter.
good night, everybody.
Good night. Thanks for the series, Ben.
Take care.
Thank you, Ben.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.